Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 55 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We got a lot to cover today. For those of you that are new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 2 decades of my life studying Bitcoin investing, money, being involved in the industry, and reporting back on this journey as we transition to a world dominated by Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. And I want to make sure you're on the right side of these changes. So we cover 3 main topics every week. Firstly, this week in Bitcoin. Secondly, this week in macro. And thirdly, this week in geopolitics. And then we make sure that you are on top of all those things, and we document it each and every week so that you can start to prepare yourself. So without further ado, we got 2 big topics to cover today. On the proof of weapons network. The fiat currency proof of weapons network is in full steam ahead right now, as both US leaders and UK leaders are meeting today to approve long-range missiles into Russia. And that approval is what Putin has said takes us to war with NATO. So the NATO forces on the proof of weapons network to benefit the Federal Reserve and its shareholders that sit underneath it, that will be issuing all the money in order to pay the lobby groups that make sure the military-industrial complex bribes Congress and our politicians to expand NATO and aggressively go into escalating all these wars. The only way that we can get to peace is by understanding the truth. So we shall cover that as well. And at the same time, we gave, as a community, the strategy to RFK, who passed it on to Donald Trump, of how to free America from the Federal Reserve with the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Asset Strategy. And instead, he is launching a shitcoin. We're going to cover everything that we know about it today and why this could be an absolute disaster and why we need to follow the money and find out what the powers that be will do with this, and how he is potentially creating an attack vector. And somebody needs to go have a word with Donald Trump's children and tell them that this is not a good move. And I shall tell you why. And if he wants to do it, I'll tell you why and how it should be done if he wants to make America great again, rather than serving the pocket of those that will have the pre-mine from this world Liberty Network, whatever it's called. We'll jump right into it. Okay. So what I want to do anyway, having been involved in this industry from the very beginning, I'm wise enough by now to say that even the most ridiculous things sometimes make people money. And so I'm always coming from the perspective of long-term sustainable wealth, building and protecting your Bitcoin wealth. Does that mean that a scam can sometimes make people money? Well, it's just a reality of the market. So do not see this as financial advice, because if I tell you something is a scam and then someone goes and makes a load of money from it, you might blame me. But the reality is these are completely distorted, manipulated markets. And if you trade on the right side of these things, you either get wrecked or you do well, but roll the dice, you're gambling. So don't treat this as financial advice. The only thing I can rely on today is Bitcoin's proof of work for a peaceful transition away from a violent, warmongering proof of weapons network created by the Federal Reserve, the deep state, and the puppet governments that do whatever the powers that be say. So what was the announcement? Well, Trump said that he is going to launch the World Liberty Financial Crypto Platform on September the 16th. That is Monday. I think we're on Friday the 13th today. And on Monday, he's going to be launching this network on an X space. Now, initially, I thought it was AI. I thought it was a scam. I thought this can't be true because there was a video of him. And what it said in the tweet, it said, "We're embracing the future with crypto and leaving the slow and outdated big banks behind." And he announced that he is endorsing and will be launching a project by his sons, Eric Trump Donald Trump Jr. and Barron Trump. And the allegation is that Barron Trump's left the last NFT project that he created and kind of threw the person under the bus that's being responsible for this right now. And most likely that was because they had another plan, and that was the network that we are receiving right now. Now, so what do we know about this thing? Well, firstly, it's meant to be taking on the banking system. Now, if anyone's a long-term watcher of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you know that the strategy that we as a community gave RFK was for my advice was for the government to build a strategic reserve asset rather than putting it on the Fed's balance sheet, so that eventually this position could put the America in a position where it could free itself from the Federal Reserve and restructure the economy and end the Fed. Now, obviously, the Fed doesn't like that, but this is what every government needs to do. This is what El Salvador is doing in order to free itself from the subsidiary of the Federal Reserve, organized through the Bank for International Settlements and the offshore division, the International Monetary Fund, which is to get countries deep into debt in order to gain political control, overthrow their governments, and make sure that they're able to securitize those economies and take over their resources. There was a draft World Liberty Financial White Paper. I'm going to pick out a few of the bits that I saw. Now, it has not been published yet. So this was reported by CoinDesk. So if I'm wrong, CoinDesk is saying they got hold of the white paper. On Monday, we'll probably be getting the white paper. But essentially, it is a DeFi platform. A DeFi platform is decentralized finance, which means that you can execute smart contracts in order to engage in transactions that don't require any middle people. They're typically organized on the Ethereum network, which we know transitioned from proof of work to proof of stake because it is more of a centralized network. And now those that own the stake are the ones that are in control of the network, which is different to Bitcoin proof of work. It doesn't matter who owns it because it's got miners that benefit from the seigniorage, node operators that validate the transactions, developers that release the code, and then they have to get a certain amount of consensus from miners and operators, and users that own it, they can push up a resistance. We had a user activated soft fork threat before when someone was trying to change a code, but you put these together, and even the companies that were trying to take over the Bitcoin code during the block war debate in order to increase the block size so that fees are lower, but it becomes more expensive to run a node, which means that you get a more centralized network. But the community chose decentralization as the primary differentiator over those lower transaction fees. But anyway, DeFi is typically done on a smart contract platform. Now, there is a load of DeFi happening on top of Bitcoin thanks to the last few releases of code we got called Taproot and various other things. But most of it happens on top of Ethereum. And so therefore, you can assume that if they're getting into DeFi, they're going to need Ethereum in order to do that. So essentially, they called it a DeFi platform for borrowing and lending. Now, if you own ETH, you are able to lock it up into a smart contract, and you're able to borrow a stable coin, which is denominated and designed to peg to the dollar, so that you don't need to sell that ETH and you can use it as collateral. And rather than relying on a bank or a financial institution, if you don't want to, if the price crashes, the collateral is margin called and liquidated in order to cover it. And because it all works by code, it works a lot better than a human. Also, if you want to send some more collateral to it, if the price is crashing below the value of the loan, then you can increase your the amount of collateral that you have. And if you miss a payment, then it can be liquidated all within the code. Okay, so that's how DeFi works, and people do it. And then they create other. So a white paper was reported, and the first draft of the project is it will allow users to store money in a digital wallet. The important part here is that it has to be self-custody if it is DeFi, and it looks like it is moving towards that direction of so-called decentralized finance, which is normally done, outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it will offer a credit account system. So that means you could borrow against it, whatever that means. We'll find out. You can borrow and lend to others, so you can earn the yield from the interest that somebody else is willing to pay. And this is where it gets a little bit funky and freaky. It says you can use tokens to invest in crypto assets, which implies that they're going to be launching their own token. And if you're launching your own token, this is the attack vector that will be an absolute disaster. And we need to really look into the distribution methodology, because we have seen all this before. Okay. It says initially that token will be a non-transferable governance token. So that means that you get a vote in the network and the future direction of it, but you can't transfer it until a certain trigger event, which makes that you can transfer it. And so this may be one of the things that he's getting advice from his legal team around how to make sure that you don't get caught up in securities laws. But obviously, this is a massively high-profile target with a lot of political desire to make this a disaster. So the World Liberty Financial Platform, it plans to raise $540 million through a token sale. Now, that means historically that has to be done in compliance with securities law. And if it's not done in compliance with securities law, this is going to lead to targeting by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so it can either be sold to accredited investors and limited to getting a Reg CF or a Reg A plus offering, which will be submitted to the SEC, and the SEC will take forever for political reasons to approve that. Or it will claim that it is not a security, which is what has led to many, many court cases, lawsuits. And then when the lawsuit comes through, the token crashes and it creates an absolute disaster. And then you have to have a freeze function, and then it's not decentralized, yada, yada, yada. Okay. And so all the lessons that we've learned. So what do we know about the token economics? Well, they're going to be selling only 30% of the project's token. Allegedly, and we will find out, 70% is allocated to insiders. Now, this is where we had the issue with the Ripple Labs versus the SEC case. It was determined that the token XRP is not a security, but the institutional sales of those tokens had to be done in compliance with securities laws, and there are still things to be resolved in that case. And so you can imagine that this case is going to be in the middle of all of that as well. Now, if that is true, that's 70% if it is meant to be the backbone of a new financial system, means that the entire financial system is being designed in a decentralized version of how the Federal Reserve was designed. The Federal Reserve was designed when a bunch of bankers that wanted to design the Federal Reserve to get the government deep in debt so that they could fund wars and that they could take over the profits from seigniorage for minting America's dollars, which previously was done for the benefit of people through a state banking system. Once you have a state banking system, if you get rid of that, you need to have income tax. And so the introduction of the Federal Reserve corresponded with income tax, and the debt has ballooned to $35 trillion in order to fund over 70 different wars and bail out all of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve and the financial institutions that are members, which has led to this massive debt, wealth inequality, and everything within that. Now, if that was genuinely, America had a state banking system and then the Federal Reserve took over as a private company, this is the same thing. If 70% of the tokens are owned, now, if it was genuinely looking to be done for America, then that 70% should be airdropped across every single American. This is kind of, but not the same, what El Salvador did with the Bitcoin strategy. So firstly, he did it on the Treasury's balance sheet rather than a private financial institution, so that the El Salvador government could benefit from the growth of Bitcoin. And then eventually the value of that Bitcoin could free it from the IMF and the Federal Reserve and the dollar, and it could do a restructuring and decide to get rid of its central bank, and take back the seigniorage by structuring a financial system in how throughout human history, without the central banks, when governments used to benefit from state banking, therefore there was less tax, less debt, less inflation, and full employment. And you can look back at the cases. So if it was doing what El Salvador did, which is essentially, it said if everyone comes with an ID, you can download the Chivo wallet, which was a bit of a disaster launch, but everyone could have $20 worth of Bitcoin. The problem with that is that should have been locked in. So when I spoke to Bukele on that one, I said you should have locked that in until retirement and done a forced hodl with all of that Bitcoin, because people were selling it for their $20. They'd rather have their $20 than Bitcoin, but others saved it. That's cool. But it looks like this 70% is going to Donald Trump's son's company. So we need to know who the shareholders are. And then those shareholders are going to be the equivalent of the members of the central bank in the Federal Reserve System, if this gets adoption and becomes a genuine threat to the financial system. And so, that's the type of thing that America should be looking out for if this is, that type of thing. But it's very suspicious around the timing. The timing of this is absolutely awful, because this could be a complete speculative frenzy where the value of this token is somewhat connected to whether Trump gets elected or not, which creates crazy things like the deep state deciding to use the assassination market in order to take advantage of token prices, or people thinking that some outcome will happen and then they speculate on that outcome. And then, everyone starts complaining to the SEC if they actually lose money. And then you feel like this is one big rug pull that we've seen time and time again. Now, I'm not saying this is what it is, but it certainly feels like this to me, because we gave the strategy to RFK. RFK presented it at Bitcoin 2024. You free yourself from the Federal Reserve by America having a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset and being the one of the early people to do it. So you get the Michael Saylor effect that was presented at Bitcoin 2024. If you haven't watched my videos where I deconstructed the RFK presentation and the Donald Trump presentation, then make sure you join Bitcoin Hard Talk, the free membership portal, where all of the video archives, a free copy of my book, all of the last Great Depression of the 2020s video series, you can find all of that there to catch up, to make sure that you are prepared. But anyway, what else have we got on this? So, by the way, if you're interested in different types of monetary systems, last weekend, I released a blog where it was like a 7-hour space and my team got it down to 4 hours. But I just wanted to document the entire history of central banking and the monetary system all the way through, and all of the history of economics. If you're a particular geek, a blog was released. If you're on YouTube, you can see it in the description. And if you're on the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, we'll put it below. And if you're on X, we'll try and get it in the comments. But you may want to check out that in order to see that blog on the history of what the world looked like before the Fed, what it looked like after, and all of the different wars that were fought in order to fight the wars of that proof of weapon network as well. Now, there was another part of it. It said that it wants to use and spread the use of USD pegged stablecoins in DeFi. Now, there are two types of stablecoins. There's an algorithmic stablecoin. Now, there was like in Ethereum network, you have like DAI and MakerDAO that uses this model. You also have protocols like Aave. Again, none of these are endorsements, but Ethereum's kind of been the beta tester to do all these things. A lot of it's also being built on top of Bitcoin, but that infrastructure, it looks like we're going to see what they're going to be using. So there's USD, there's algorithmic stablecoins where they're designed to send a token around the internet to anybody. And it is almost like an algorithmic full reserve banking where it depegs if there is any issue with the collateral backing it or the model. Or you can have a centralized one like Tether or Circle, where essentially it becomes a full reserve bank. Somebody puts some dollars in, they get a token. Tether got about $118 billion issued. Last time I looked at Circle, I think it was about $40 billion. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Circle through Bank to the Future, and also a shareholder in Bitfinex, which is a partner company to Tether. I like to disclose all those every time I discuss these, just so you can decide whether I'm being biased or anything. But anyway, those stable coins are centralized ones. And what they do is they remove the need for a bank because people can send stable coins around the internet. Those that are validating the transactions benefit from that use case. And you can get them both on Bitcoin and Ethereum, but a lot more of them exist on Ethereum. And even when you go down some of the crazier chains, which are way more centralized, easier to attack, you get cheaper and cheaper fees, and some of the stable coins are backed on there. But the big thing there is that if you look at the Federal Reserve, the lender to the Treasury, the 18th largest lender to the US government right now is in fact Tether. Because every time it buys those dollars and issues its tokens, it lends it to the US government, then the US government pays the interest on it, and then it uses some of that interest in order to cover its overhead, buy Bitcoin, and invest in Bitcoin mining. And it gets approximately the last 6 months, I think it got about 8,000 Bitcoin by giving everybody the ability for full reserve banking. That is a big threat to the financial system. This is why when Facebook tried to do it through the Libra project, the Fed, the European Central Bank, every single regulator and financial institutions pulled Mark Zuckerberg into Congress, and he had to be questioned. And he had to kill the project, sell it to Silvergate, and then Silvergate eventually shut it down when the Fed attacked Silvergate for its role in FTX by allowing money to be transferred from the hedge fund Alameda Capital to FTX, the exchange, which was a big fraud based upon SBF's work as well. But, kind of like the Fed, if it's a centralized version, it's a bit like the bank, but you have full reserve banking, which is an improvement, and that's a big threat to fractional reserve banking. But the government might decide we'll let the banks go bust, but this could cause massive instability in the Federal Reserve financial system if people transition to this system without having a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset, and without planning how that unwind of the banking system from the Federal Reserve system, from a debt-based monetary system to a debt-free monetary system. That was the subject of my book that I wrote in 2011, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And if you are that way interested, you can get a free copy of that book by joining the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Anyway, so some of the community have started to do a bit of on-chain analysis, and they noticed that there were some similarities between the code of the World Libertarian, whatever it is, WLF we'll call it, and a project called Do Finance. And so immediately there is some little attack vectors where people are thinking how to use this for political means, or hackers are going to start using how to hack this system. But there was a previous DeFi protocol, and it was hacked earlier this year. And so if they're using that code, that creates suspicion as well. But remember, this network, as a centralized controlled network, even though they say it's DeFi, because 70% of the pre-mine will be associated with a company, which will be connected to the potential next president's children, And if they create the new financial system that creates a speculative attack through a stable coin on the Federal Reserve System, then you want that to be for the benefit, and constitutionally, it says in the US Constitution that the US government is meant to provide that monetary system and is meant to be coined based upon hard money. And so the strategy that we gave, RFK that gave to Trump, and then Cynthia Eunice did part of it through the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Asset Bill. Hopefully that's being followed, but this is such a tangent, such a distraction, and it's not structured in a way that's constitutional. So I think this is going to get major pushback. And the reason I'm so skeptical about this, and again, I'll listen to the space and I'll tell you if I'm wrong about any of these points, is that I have seen this 1,000 times before, having been involved in this industry when it was only Bitcoin, and invested in so many companies and different structures, and seen this time and time again. Now, this could be used as a political hack vector. So this is a dangerous type of thing. Now, imagine all of the MAGA fans getting this adoption. They're connecting the price to the election. And then you've got all of these weaponized different tools that are being used as well. You're going to have all of these impersonators, so be careful. Everyone's going to create a fake version of this project and try and get you to invest into it. And then people are going to be using that to say, I lost all my lifetime savings because they sent it to someone that was creating a fake version of the project and created a phishing version of it. You got to be ultra careful with these things. And then they'll be using those screenshots, and then the Democrat Party or the deep state will be using it in order to say Trump is scamming people. This is going to be an absolute shit show, I can assure you. Then securities laws and regulators are going to come. They'll pick their opportune moment in order to enforce that. They did that with the Libra project, and maybe this is the strategy. Maybe the strategy is to announce the project and then have all the regulators and power that be attack it, shut it down, and then it could be a marketing strategy for I'm coming up against the deep state. But you then lose all of the goodwill you had with the Bitcoin community that is working on real solutions to actually challenge and end the Fed, build a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Well, that's my strategy anyway. I don't think other people have similar strategies, but I know what the net effect is. And then you have all the market manipulation that can come from that. It will be connected to political careers, as I said, even if you want to get as dark as possible, assassination attempts, all sorts of stuff. Nothing is off the table. So I really do not think that this is the way to go about it. We gave him the right strategy, and maybe he's just got bad advisors and there's an opportunistic opportunity to make money, and they're confusing Bitcoin with crypto. But really, you got to do this right. You got to get the timing right. And it needs to be done in consultation, not with just a bunch of people that are trying to make a bunch of money. It's got to be done with, just like the state banking system is set up. You have to do it for the benefit of Americans to reduce the amount of tax by taking seigniorage income away from the Federal Reserve and handing it over to what it was meant to be by Constitution. But anyway, a lot of goodwill is being lost. A lot's been lost from me. I didn't put much faith in this anyway, but it's made me more and more skeptical. Other people may see this as a good thing for Ethereum or whatever, but the conspiracy theories have already started. So, the media has already started to do some digging investigation. There was a report that was published saying that the website has been used anonymously using a privacy service. And then they said that that privacy service has been previously linked to Russian cybersecurity attacks. Newsweek reported this. We know that this is the story that keeps coming up again and again and again, but you start to see the types of weaponization and then creating all these attack vectors, as was the case when Facebook tried to do it. And remember, I published a video on my X actually from a presentation I gave in 2011 where I was sharing the future vision, predicted central bank digital currencies, stable coins, and I said Facebook would try and become a bank and I shared what we were doing in the Bitcoin community, and some crazy little things. Check it out. I'm going to be publishing more of the very, very old videos from my monetary reform days and helping everyone understand, because I look back at it and said, that guy's actually predicted some good things right. It's pretty smart. I wish I was as smart as that guy, the 2011 Simon Dixon, a bit of a blithering idiot sometimes now. But anyway, the US needs to use Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. Go back to my videos deconstructing the RFK presentation of Bitcoin 2024 and the Trump one to understand how it works. And this won't replace banks. If you do want to, replace banks, you don't do it with a private company by the president's family. That's just not the right way to go about it. The whole point in Bitcoin is doing this in a decentralized way and then building it on geopolitically neutral rails, which is what Bitcoin does, and not having the token that makes this whole obfuscation as well. Anyway, there is an end the Fed bill. Remember, Thomas Massey's got it in there. It won't get through because you need a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset, from my perspective, before you can end the Fed, because you need to arrange a transition. And we need to agree that the Fed is the predatory institution that's causing all these wars at the moment. And some people that create the curriculums at economics and across our colleges and universities will tell you that it's not. Okay. Anyway, follow the Constitution. I think it was a great document, and it told you how to create money, and all will be good, because it was based upon Christian principles. And so I covered all of that in the blog on the history of central banking as well. Decentralization is important. Self-custody is important. So we've had a little bit about that. Now, it did say there were a little bit more rumors as well that it's going to be partnering with the decentralized protocol Aave. And Aave is the technology that allows you to lock up your Bitcoin in smart contracts and yield and take loans against it. You need to have self-custody in order for all that to work. So it looks like this might be a fork of Aave because it's open source code. And that implies that this is going to be built on top of Ethereum. Now, remember, Bitcoin proof of work, it doesn't matter who owns it. With Ethereum, that is very different. With Ethereum, whoever stakes it owns the network or controls part of that network. And this is why when BlackRock engineered the launch of our industry to get as many people to take their dollars, convert them into shares backed by Bitcoin, rather than owning Bitcoin instead, where the government gave a tax incentive to do that through 401ks so that you don't end up self-custodying. This means that they later launched the Ethereum network, Ethereum ETF. And so the financial institutions are accumulating that position. Now, to be fair, they can't stake it yet, but I'm sure they'll use their lobby power in order to be enabled to stake it so that they can incentivize more people to give up their Ethereum and buy shares in the ETH ETF instead. And so, that will likely be how this ends up if it's built on top of Ethereum. So, as we said, I will keep reporting that every single week. Now, there was also a little bit of news, and this is the play in which you get from Ethereum to Bitcoin, is that one way of doing this is you could have a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset, and then you could have a Bitcoin retirement plan type of structure, which I advised to do El Salvador, but it didn't actually get implemented in the end. Hopefully it comes once they free themselves from the IMF. But then you can start to take on more of the Ponzi schemes like Medicare and Social Security, that because of the baby boomers after World War II, all those people are retiring, and now they need to bring in many, many more immigrants to get the demographics right, to get tax that comes in. But instead, you could put together a Bitcoin-style strategy and just look after the ones that are there now, but remove some of those liabilities when you actually change your economy through hard money. And one way of doing that, if you're in the ETH ecosystem, is, as I said, you can create a bunch of risks. People can deposit their Bitcoin into custody, and then they get a token, which is called a wrapped ETH. And Coinbase actually announced that they've already launched this week, coincidence, CBBTC. And so they're creating their own wrapped BTC. Now, at the same time as Coinbase launching it, at the same time as this DeFi protocol being launched by Trump, we also had attack vectors on the largest wrapped version of Bitcoin, which is WBTC. And so WBTC, the way it works is it custodies through a Silicon Valley company called BitGo. And they made an announcement at the same time. They announced that it is planning to transition control of WBTC, not just to BitGo, so they custody the Bitcoin, but to a joint operation with a custody platform. And the name of that platform is BitGlobal. So I looked a little bit deeper into BitGlobal. But the idea is that the way that they frame this is that the deal is to distribute control over the project's custody to 3 entities. And this is, designed instead of having just exposure to 1. Okay, well, that sounds good. That sounds like a good process. But what happened next? So it was framed as that this is a way of decentralizing the operation a little bit more with the centralized parties. There is frames of decentralization and centralization. I try and keep people up to date so that because everyone just slaps a plaster on these projects. That's what happened with Terra Luna. He said it's decentralized when it was really just central banking backed by VCs that were looking to create a pump and dump scheme and took the market down with it when the Federal Reserve took the market down by hiking rates. And then that destroyed some banks in the 2023 bank run. That was when Peter Thiel came on Spaces and told everyone to withdraw. And then Bill Ackman asked the government to underwrite the entire banking system so he could buy the banks up for free. But the Fed and the FDIC then took over instead, took out all of the crypto-friendly banks, and then the SEC started approving BlackRock and the other financial institutions. And so anyone that was holding without doing it through, self-custody ended up getting on the wrong side of those bankruptcies. But anyway, BitGlobal, I looked it up. It's a global custody platform. I hadn't heard of it before, but it was regulated with operations in Hong Kong. I used to live in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong has a very good trust structure. A lot of global finance happens through Hong Kong. But obviously, Hong Kong is in the process of, because the British Empire took over Hong Kong through the Opium Wars and created HSBC in order to fund the drug cartels around the world by using the opium poppy seeds from India and tried to get China addicted so it could steal all of India's gold and China's silver in its mercantilism model, get that back and then back the Great British Pound through the British East India Company and various other things. That lease has expired because there was a 100-year lease. And so Hong Kong was returned back to China. And they've got that 3-4 tier system, but a one China policy, which brings us back into the geopolitical side, which we will cover after as well. But it's registered as a trust company service provider, TCSP it's called. Which is a good regulatory regime. I've had good experience with the Hong Kong regulators from my time. It's kind of, they create an environment where you can be a very global business. It was very global thinking. But it was a strategic partnership between, then I looked into that company, a strategic partnership between BitGo and Justin Sun and the Tron ecosystem. And so the Tron ecosystem and Justin Sun are a disaster. My allegation against them, but they've been acquiring exchanges like Huobi and Poloniex, which created this crazy network. It's a lot of tethers operate off the Tron ecosystem, but this creates a serious attack vector for WBTC, where the regulators can now come after Justin Sun and Tron. And then that can have an impact on the custody model. And then that can have an impact on wrapped Bitcoin. And then that can have an impact on the Ethereum network. and then the stakers can have an impact, and stablecoins can be used in order to control the proof of stake ecosystem, as it was when USDC started to say we're coming off the Tron blockchain due to the fact that Justin Sun has received an investigation, and then sanctions can be used in order to weaponize the ecosystem. Now you know why we love Bitcoin, right? And we treat Ethereum very differently, and these different types of blockchains as well. And we are very skeptical about different types of ecosystems, because we know that Bitcoin was a one-time freak event that should never have succeeded, but it did succeed because it was at a time when no one was looking, no one was paying attention, and we bootstrapped through free market Austrian economics, the largest supercomputer in the world. And now you've got geopolitically strategic different miners from sovereign states, from public companies, from individual solo miners as well, that make sure that that network is not able to be attacked by any government or any ecosystem as well. Okay, so the Tron ecosystem becomes the weakness there. And so I don't believe that there are any coincidences. All these things seem to happen at the same time. And I just want to make sure on Bitcoin Hard Talk that I'm connecting all the dots for you so that you can manage your risk appropriately. My lifetime mission has always been to make sure that people use this amazing thing called Bitcoin in order to build and protect their wealth, to free themselves from the oppression of central banks, so that every company and country can do it as well afterwards. And we are winning, but there's a lot of confusion along the way. Anyway, this creates key person risk, which is the problem with every other type of fork of Bitcoin. There's always a key person risk. And where there's a key person risk, the SEC follows, or another four-letter institution or three-letter institution, whether it be the DOJ, the CFTC, the FTC, the SEC, and then you have all of the European cronies as well, and the UK cronies, which are all subsets of the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, the Bank for International Settlements, the IMF, and that cabal that was created in order to fund all these wars for governments that we find ourselves in right now. And so there was already a pivot, and you can see how these centralized VCs can now start to have an impact. As soon as that was announced that they were going to be pivoting, there was criticism as the community started to figure out it was connected to Justin Sun and the Tron ecosystem. And one of the big lenders, a giant lender called in the DeFi ecosystem called Sky, basically voted to offboard wrap Bitcoin due to the Justin Sun connection. And this this action can impact about $200 million of DeFi loans within this Sky ecosystem. And that's a VC-backed ecosystem as well, if that actually passes. And so we start to see these centralized attack vectors around key people. I already said how that happened in stablecoin world through USDC as they started to get more control. And they did it based upon the Justin Sun connection. And so you can see that Justin Sun is obviously going to be one of the targets. And we learned from the Binance coup, where essentially America took over the compliance department, fined 4.7 billion, installed their own division in there. And then when, for political reasons, Israel contacts Binance to say, can you please halt all of these accounts of Palestinians that are going through a genocide? They freeze them, and now the Palestinians can't get hold of their money. And they started to do it with anyone at different regions as well, like Lebanon and Turkey. And we started to get all these customers where Binance then said to Israel will decide whether you can have your money or not. And we know how much they lie based upon all the work that we've been covering on Bitcoin Hard Talk when we do the geopolitical section. Okay. So this forced users to use real Bitcoin, which is a good thing. Everybody needs to go through their own cycle. But when Trump launches projects based upon DeFi, it drives people into some of these distractions. Now, this can be risk managed, but it can't be the backbone of the system unless you want to have an obfuscated secret society like was created with the Federal Reserve System, where it was designed behind closed doors and pretending that because it's got 12 Federal Reserve banks underneath it, that it can obfuscate all the shareholders, when clearly the goal was to fund war, get America into debt, make the government bigger and bigger and bigger, and make America unconstitutional, and be able to take away the profits from seigniorage from the government and remove the gold standard as well, as was seen in 71. Okay. But there is a fight for self-custody. Now, I'm just as critical as the United Kingdom government, but the UK has now launched all of its crypto regulations. Bank to the Future has been through the process so we can compliantly offer our services to UK investors, and gone through the financial promotions process. And so there is a UK regulatory regime in the case of the UK, with the centralized companies. But it also introduced, this is good and bad, let me tell you why. It introduces a bill in the UK that happened this week that would recognize Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as personal property. Now, this is important. It's already been treated as property. The reason that El Salvador treats it as currency is because they want to free themselves from the International Monetary Fund. And so they want to be used as a currency, which means that it is tax-free when making purchases and doing transactions. A property, if you engage in a gain, then that gain is subject to capital gains tax. And by making this a new categorization, if it is, sorry for the lawyers, use the comment section below or tweets if you think any of this is inaccurate based upon UK law, but you may be able to have a two-tier tax system. And so obviously that will be enforced through the ETFs. And those are the types of things that can be happening in more of these oppressive governments, which the UK is fastly becoming as well. So it's basically a way of saying we want to tax your Bitcoin, but it does have a side effect. It means that the courts can use personal property to allow for self-custody. And so it becomes a Magna Carta or constitutional right, or a First Amendment issue with freedom of speech in order to be able to own your own financial wealth. The England's High Court also at the same time just came out today. It said that the justice rules that Tether, stablecoin USDT, is also property, which is interesting. So that means that you might be able to self-custody USDT, even though it's backed by US treasuries, which means that we may be moving towards a peer-to-peer, full reserve banking system. It's not decentralized, but it has pockets of centralization, but that can create a speculative attack on the Federal Reserve banking system and fractional reserve banking system, which were the net beneficiaries of the central banking system. So self-custody has got a victory here. Hopefully you can get that in America and around the rest of the world. And this is because it's a win-win. They get to tax, we get to self-custody. If you come from a country where you can take your wealth with you, I know that the Kamala Harris side is looking to implement a wealth tax, which means you'd have to sell your Bitcoin to pay your tax, even if you didn't want to sell it. I don't think that will get through. So the fight is really for freedom of speech so that we can share all this information and so that you can protect the Constitution and protect yourself from these governments that have been taken over by central banks. Speaking of which, the company that's doing it best is absolutely kick-ass. Michael Saylor just kicks ass again. After the presentation that he gave around, the Bitcoin and the race for the last Bitcoin and the true scarce asset that it is, MicroStrategy has acquired another 18,300 Bitcoin for approximately $1.1 billion. And that is at an average price of $60,408 per Bitcoin. I've always said this. I buy Bitcoin every single month because I want to sell fiat currency to store value in Bitcoin. And people always say to me, yeah, Simon, you were lucky. You were there from the beginning and you got them at $3. But no, what I did was I recognized that this is the asset that allows you to offboard from fiat, and you can save and bring savings back to the economy, and you can have Austrian economics. And because I was trying to create a bank at the time, Bank to the Future actually pivoted because it was trying to create a full reserve bank. But when Bitcoin was created, we pivoted to funding the industry. And then we went on to fund many of the largest companies in our industry. Some of them went crazy. Like Coinbase, a $100 billion unicorn that went public on NASDAQ, and many other things in between, because we thought it was a collective effort to decentralize the creation of this ecosystem. So anyway, MicroStrategy, a public company, now has 244,800 Bitcoin that it has acquired for an average of $9.45 billion at an average price of 38,585 per Bitcoin. Turned a software company into a treasury management company where the income generated from the software can be used, and he can leverage up the financial markets in order to create a Bitcoin leverage play. I'm not a leverage man, missionary. I'm against that. I believe that the power of Bitcoin is not in the leverage, it's in owning your own value, spending your own value, and unleveraging from the leverage that is built into the fiat currency Ponzi scheme. So the Bank of Japan, which by the way was another victim of the proof of weapons network, the Bank of Japan originally, there was a bank in Japan, during the 30s. It was a state banking system with good growth, no inflation, full employment, and it obviously got drawn into the war through the oil embargo. And when it got drawn into the war, it was taken over by the debt-based financial system, by the banksters that control the proliferation of the debt-based monetary system. So the Bank of Japan obviously has been in the spotlight recently because of the carry trade. But we got an announcement that Japan's largest electricity company, which I believe is privatized. I haven't studied a bit more into this, but there are two different models. You can have resources used for the benefit of your people, which reduces the amount of tax, or you can privatize it and have it to the free market and people can buy stocks in it. I believe that the largest electricity company in Tokyo, it is going to be using its electric power and renewable energy to mine Bitcoin. This is awesome. The more and more electrical companies start to realize that they can use Bitcoin as a transition over to renewable energy, nuclear energy, and they can actually use it in order to make ultra efficiencies with wasted electricity, which has been done in Texas to great benefit and great effect. This is absolutely awesome to see. And this is another case study for how you can build one of the pillars to free yourself from the Bank of Japan Ponzi scheme that is issuing out debt, loans to anybody that wants to speculate and lend it to the US government and buy derivatives to hedge out some of the risk. And then you have that massive Japan carry trade that needed to unwind as Japan tries to control its inflation. And we will see what their monetary policy is and whether they're going to be increasing rates and whether that comes back as another problem within the economy. But why not build an electrical ecosystem based upon Bitcoin mining? And then you can have that efficiency improvement. In El Salvador, they're building out the geothermal power based upon volcano power. That was something we did in Iceland in 2014 when we launched at Bank to the Future, the first Bitcoin bond that paid daily dividends to bondholders, one of the best investments on Bank to the Future. We had people where that was their full retirement because some people have still kept those Bitcoins. We were generating thousands of Bitcoins in those days because we were using the cooling of the climate in Iceland with geothermal, volcano powered electricity. It in fact became so big at one stage that there was not enough electricity for the people. And so they had to do a very efficient system. And that created a wave of innovation within Iceland. And they built all these servers out that were good for privacy. And it was awesome what came from that when you have free markets. But you could use, if Japan decided that the Bank of Japan has become too predatory on its economy, it can replace a debt-based monetary Ponzi scheme where it could borrow against its Bank of Japan and it could buy Bitcoin at the same time as it builds its Bitcoin strategic reserve asset if Japan has any interest in freeing itself from the slavery of the debt-based Bank of Japan system that led to one of the largest welfare economies in the world and 230% debt to GDP as a result of its occupation by America after the World War. Okay, so that's another interesting as well use case as well. By the way, the state banking system in Japan was ended in 1941. And that was when they were forced into the oil embargo in order to force Japan into the war so that they could replace the state banking system with the Bank of Japan later. Right, well, that's everything on the Bitcoin side. I hope you enjoy how I tie that together for the Bitcoin side. Now, last week, I didn't get to cover the macro or the geopolitics. So we might be a little bit longer today, but do stay with me because there is a lot going on. And there was serious escalation on the proof of weapons network today. I'll cover that when we cover that side. People really need to be prepared and understanding where their government debt is coming from. Because if you look at the whole $35 trillion of the US debt, it corresponds with all the wars that the proof of weapons network made it force and the bailouts of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve and the financial system that created a moral risk by trying to get the Federal Reserve and the government to socialize losses so that it could pump a debt-based Ponzi scheme and get the government deep into debt so it could control it through its lobby groups. Anyway, we had a bit of a stock market correction today. These markets, you know, they always cry to the Federal Reserve. They're the justification in order to get the Federal Reserve to reduce rates so that not the stock market, the Fed market can increase. But at some point, the stock market, the US stock market, lost $1.78 trillion that was wiped out in the first week of September. And so that's causing a little bit of concern. The darling NVIDIA that relies 100% upon Taiwan for its chips, that is the backbone of the infrastructure in America for artificial intelligence and essential to the AI play. And NVIDIA, it plunged by over about 9.5% that it shed off in one day. Now, these are healthy corrections. I like markets that correct. For me, when the Bitcoin market corrects, that's great. It means I get to buy more Bitcoin with my fiat currency. The longer it does that for, the better, because I know what I believe to be the long-term play there. And if you want to know what the long-term play of Bitcoin is, just zoom out, put a logarithmic chart on there, go to the entire history, and you'll see a 14-year bull market with 4-year cycles based around halving cycles and political cycles. And it solves many of the problems that the proof of weapons network creates, and creates opportunities for individuals, countries, and governments to free themselves from it. Okay, so it lost a bunch of value, but at the same time, all the stats are being lined up in order to justify the rate decrease so that all the people that own the stocks and own the real estate can say, the Fed, thank you very much. Give me some more heroin on the heroin that is created from the drug dealing of the Federal Reserve. And so US inflation, it's falling down to 2.5%. That was lower than expected. So they get to tell the narrative that inflation is under control, even though the prices were unaffordable. It's a cumulative inflation. So that's still 2.5% on top of the unaffordable prices. And it is only a debt-based monetary system that requires systemic inflation, but they love their systemic inflation. We had some comments from Donald Trump as well, saying that he will be charging, as part of his policy, 100% tariffs on countries that are shifting away from the US dollar if he becomes an elected president. So this will lead to more de-dollarization. Now, Americans' weapons like sanctions, tariffs, is what is leading to much of this war. The sanctioning of Russia after its NATO expansive policy and violating all the end of the Cold War agreements, where it said that Ukraine would be a neutral zone between Europe and Russia that led to many, many Ukrainian lives being taken away, and terrorist attacks from America, like blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline in order to destroy the European economy so that it now has to get its gas from America at a higher rate, which had a massive knock-on effect so that the European Central Bank could benefit with the Fed, with the cronies at the Fed, from all of this debt slavery and destruction of economies and deeper into debt. And then they get to double up the NATO budget so everyone can spend more weapons and the military industrial complex stocks can increase, which is all laundered through many of the colleges in universities where university protesters and college protesters are asking them their endowment funds to defund the military industrial complex. You see how this all fits together when you think that there is no coincidence. Anyway, we also had some good numbers with unemployment, 4.2%. That was better than expected. And so this creates the perfect environment to ask the Federal Reserve to please decrease rates. So it's completely factored into the markets right now. The market is expecting a 0.5% rate decrease, and people are just arguing whether it's going to be a 0.25% or a 0.5%, or by the end of the year, 1%. And everyone can do their mental gymnastics to find out how you keep a debt-based Ponzi scheme alive and create more inflation that creates more wealth inequality and creates the justification that will lead to wars in the end. So basically, that's what's going on the US side, and these are the so-called pioneers of free markets, and I call them Fed markets because they're just not stock markets anymore. At the same time, the banksters and financial terrorists at the European Central Bank, they decided to cut their rates again for a second time. So they're leading the path that can become the justification for the US to do it. And this is the second time in 6 months in order to fuel the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And now that America has committed terrorism on the Nord Stream pipeline, made oil more expensive in Germany, and then Germany, which, by the way, in that interwar period as well, was another one of those countries that had state banking. And there's been a lot of controversy that's been released recently around Churchill's role in escalating and removing all the peace talks that happened in Germany as well. And so because they had a massive hyperinflationary cycle in that interwar period, they replaced it and they took out the central banks and they replaced it with debt-free state banking, which led to essentially Germany becoming the most powerful force in the world. And obviously they did their colonial expansion, and all peace talks were taken down, and we had all the aggressors. And then the Treaty of Versailles and various other reforms removed the debt-free banking system and replaced it with the debt-based Ponzi scheme from the Bank of England and the engineers and the Bank for International Settlements, that later was converted into the European Central Bank so that the ECB could back Germany and all of its different counterparts in Europe. And they kept the Bank of England, though. And notice how England was the only one that remained its independence, because they wanted the Bank of England, the ECB, the Federal Reserve, the Bank for International Settlements, and those were important parts of the proof of weapons network. But there were further announcements, because this is created through many of these sanctions, a resistance movement against it. All of the countries that were sanctioned started having to trade with each other. And they started to create innovation around de-dollarization. They were fine with the status quo, but the NATO aggression and the regime changes where, America overthrew the Iranian government in history, and ensured that Israel was the sole nuclear power in order to support the Greater Israel project, where Israel becomes a larger and larger colony. You can see the size of the Greater Israel project when you look at the IDF, the badges on the side. It includes parts of Lebanon, West Bank, Palestine, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and various other regions as well. Well, anyway, because of that, this new corridor called BRICS has been pushed forward to create a competing currency so that the dollar can become a better currency that just trades rather than engages in terrorism and aggression. And of course, it was weaponized to sanction China so that Taiwan can't sell chips for AI to China. And that led to, the enforcement of the one China policy. And that's why we're getting this massive investment where all of these military forces are taking America deeper and deeper into debt, creating more inflation. The numbers are being fudged. And now you can get those rate decreases so that debt can increase and you can repeat the cycle. Well, anyway, the Chinese yuan has now, because of the terrorism that happened from the Nord Stream pipeline, it has now beaten the euro to become the second most used currency in the world. And so the Chinese yuan is now the second most used currency behind the dollar, which has the hegemony power at the moment. And at the same time, Algeria officially authorized to join BRICS. I think there's now, they're going to be joining the BRICS Development Bank. So they're going to be looking at making investments in countries in infrastructure. And it may be done based upon the previous Russian banking system before that was overthrown with the Soviet Union debt-based system that used Marxist economics to create a version of the Federal Reserve to fund the communist movement after the Bolshevik Revolution. They could go back to the debt-free model, and that's why Gaddafi got taken out as well, because that's what they were trying to do in Libya before the US terrorists overthrew all of those different regimes to install the debt-based banking system as well. But anyway, they're now doing new development banks, and we don't have the full details yet. And I'm hoping it's not going to look like what Trump's trying to create. I'm hoping it's not going to look like what I covered last week when Venezuela created the Petro scam. Hopefully they're going to do these things properly, and we have a genuine competition, which is good for everybody, so that we can prevent World War III and everyone can build their Bitcoin strategic reserve assets and throw out the Federal Reserve, which is taking us into all these wars because they profit from it through their lobby powers as well. Turkey's President Erdogan, they have now officially accepted the invite to attend the BRICS summit in Russia, which is going to be held next month. And that's where they're going to be revealing, I think it's now up to, how many countries have we seen? But they're the first NATO country. This creates a very, very strange and interesting alliance as well. So BRICS is forming the competing currency to the dollar, fueling the de-dollarization movement because America started sanctioning everybody. So now nobody could trade with each other. So they're now trading with each other. And now we have a NATO member, Turkey, joining BRICS. And so this shows that diplomacy can work if you take out the bad powers that want to profit from these wars and take over our politicians to fund and push it in that direction. And so this would be the first NATO member that could be a member of BRICS. The European Union countries, they've now announced that they're importing more gas from Russia than the United States now. So the Nord Stream pipeline terrorist attack basically just increased created more inflation and increased the cost of the natural gas, but it's being imported from Russia anyway. And so this was for the first time in 2 years. So this is just showing us we need to trade with each other, we need to prevent the wars, and we need to be truthful around our regimes and who the real aggressors are. And so we need to expose our governments, which is why I've been so adamant in making sure that everyone understands these different things. And I was gifted because, fortunately, Bitcoin funded WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks exposes everything without the propaganda of the government TV channels so that we can learn the truth. And I can condense it down because I'm a geek so that we can make sure that you have the information so that you can protect more people as well in your circle. Okay. And so Donald Trump says he's doubling down on sanctions. He said that US sanctions against Russia. So what does it say? Sorry, let me get that. Right. Now, Trump's doing the right thing. So if you can believe what he said he's going to lift US sanctions against Russia because he thinks and knows it's hurting the dollar. So he knows the world reserve currency can only be one that's not weaponized against competing ideologies. And because NATO was the aggressor, and RFK always talks about this, that BlackRock owns half of Ukraine and that they're killing Ukrainians and sacrificing them for the NATO terrorists in order to weaken Russia so that they can escalate. And they're probably designing part of the system behind BRICS because it may use mBridge. The mBridge is the network of central bank digital currencies. That mBridge is part of the Bank for International Settlements. The Bank for International Settlements was the subset of the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve that was arranging the reparations that created the hyperinflation in Germany that led to the aggression when they created the debt-free state banking system. And so they hedge both sides. And so they may be getting prepared to try and turn the BRICS currency into a debt-based Ponzi scheme, which is why we need Bitcoin to resist against both sides as well as we enter into this new world. Anyway, the BRICS countries, they now have 159 participants that have agreed they will adopt the new payment system as a competitor to SWIFT, which is how a control is exerted from America in order to control the international payment system. And they say they're going to be doing this on cryptocurrency. I don't know quite what that means, but you can bet your bet dollar. I'll figure it out and make sure we report it in future episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. So make sure that you, I'm going to take a quick water before we go into the geopolitical section, which will be the final section, pulls all this together. And it's very important that you wait because our countries, our leaders, is an absolute failure in leadership because they are owned and controlled by the deep state, by the central banks, in order to exert what they want for these debt-based Ponzi schemes and the proof of weapons network. Let me cover the final points before we go to geopolitics. I'll take a quick water break. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is do me a favor, repost, share, subscribe, retweet, add a comment. Do all of that for me because YouTube and none of the networks give us any love. I'm growing on Twitter, but YouTube doesn't want to show any of this. Could it be that they are controlled by the same types of people that don't want you to know this information? Okay. Well, X wasn't part of that plan, unfortunately. So President Xi Jinping, he has now pledged over $50 billion of financial aid to Africa to deepen relations, but with a commitment that there is no regime change. Like whenever you take money from the IMF, you end up doing it all through debt. And then you have to agree to install a central bank plant. You have to agree to have your leadership. They throw over your leadership if you don't do their plant. They prop up the proof of weapons network. And when you can't pay their debt, they destroy your currency. They get you in dollar debt, and then they take over your resources in order to plunge up the demand for the dollar as well. And so he's promised. Do we believe it? No, we believe in decentralization, but I also believe in competition because absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so it's very important that we get a competing to all of these repressive central banks with a new model based upon the model that has proven throughout history to not cause inflation, to not cause excessive debts, and to lead to good gold reserves for the countries that don't hand over their constitutional rights to minting money and giving the sovereign the seigniorage profit over to the central bank. Putin came out and he said that oil production in the Middle East, if they stopped using the dollar, it will be the end of the dollar. And so we've covered the petrodollar many times. You know, this is the way of, there's the euro dollar and the petrodollar. And this is why Middle East was destabilized, because the Middle East, it was split up by Britain in a way where they could never pull together their oil resources. You know, the British Empire gave the Rothschilds Israel in order to inflict a destabilizing region. And it has been at war ever since, so that they can't pull together their oil resources. And anyone that's tried to create a debt-free financial system backed by oil has ended up being assassinated, killed, and on the wrong side of a war. And that creates the fake war on terror that leads as the justification. So we can all feel good about our freedom while we kill, assassinate, murder, and pay for it through our inflation. Anyway, so, the petrodollar was that system that was designed. And what we're seeing right now is it went from basically everyone that buys oil from Saudi Arabia, which is the most important oil producer, they can control the price through, increasing or decreasing their reserves. Anytime you trade that oil, you have to buy the dollar, which creates demand for the dollar. And then if you're holding dollars, the central banks then buy treasuries, lend it to the US government, and that creates the demand for treasuries, which creates the funding that's needed for wars as well, in order to maintain the empire. But they've gone down from 100% to about 70% through Russia and China trades of settling oil. And so Saudi Arabia may take that down to about 50%. Saudi Arabia may join BRICS. That will depend on whether Palestine is allowed to be free, which brings us nicely into the geopolitical section. So do me a favor, retweet, post, share. Make sure people get this information. I'm just going to refresh my breath, and then we're going to get myself some water and dehydrate. And then I'm going to do the final geopolitical section, and then we'll wrap up for today. Okay, right. What is happening today is incredibly disturbing. So let's do a bit of a recap. So everybody that may be new to the broadcast, maybe they've not seen all the previous episodes. But let's make sure we understand the environment that we are in today. So today, the UK leaders, after being accused by Putin that the diplomats that were meant to be negotiating peace were in fact spies in order to ensure that Ukraine destroys and kills more Russians through UK and US weapons, he made that accusation. Keir Starmer said that it's not true. So the Russian propaganda machine is saying that. The UK propaganda machine is saying that version of the story. But at the same time, the UK and the US, our leaders are meeting today to approve that long-range missiles created in the UK and created in the US can be fired from Ukraine by NATO into Russia. President Putin said that that is the red line for him, considering that Russia is at war with NATO and all of its partners, and particularly the UK, which prevented all of the peace talks when Boris Johnson went over there and persuaded Ukraine to not sit down and not engage in any peace talks, and instead take the money that the central banks were created and spend it on the military industrial complex and weaken Russia and kill more Ukrainians, while the media pretends that these governments are good actors trying to protect democracy and look after borders that were violated when the agreement between the end of the Cold War that was Ukraine would always be neutral, there could be no NATO expansion, and when Russia wanted to join NATO to create world peace, the Clinton administration agreed, but the CIA reversed that, said no, escalated because they are part of the structure of the central banking mafia. Okay, so they're all meeting today, and that's the current state of affairs. We have escalated this beyond escalation. If this were up to governments acting in the interest of their countries, and they didn't have a debt-based Ponzi scheme where they need to fuel the military-industrial complex to create more debt that creates more inflation and a cost of living crisis for their people, they would not be funding this stuff. This is not protecting democracy. This is a hegemony power funded by the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, to make sure that other countries are not able to compete in free markets. And if you want to go through any of that history, I can go through that in other different types of things. But the Biden and Harris administration is finalizing the plans right now to allow Ukraine to launch those long-range missile strikes in Russia, which was a stated policy of the US that they wouldn't do that, and a stated policy of the UK, because Russia has as many nukes and they claim to have better nukes than America. We have already seen, if anyone, I didn't live through the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I've been speaking with people who lived through that and how scary that moment was. And it requires a strong president, a strong leader to stand up against the lobby groups, to stand up against the intelligence agencies, and stand up against the central banks to ensure that it acts in the interest of the country rather than the special interest groups that are driving us to this war. And that's what we need. We need strong leadership. We have weak leadership all around, because they are controlled and taking the money from those that want to expand NATO to the Middle East and make Israel the sole power for the sole illegal nukes, by the way. No inspections, achieve them all through assassinations, terrorisms, and illegal activities. And now they admit they've got nukes because they said that they're going to blow up Gaza. And everyone's meant to pretend that that's not meant to lead to sanctions. And then we're meant to pretend that the administrations didn't sign a deal with Iran to make sure that this never escalated to this situation, when Israel decided that it would attack those and needed the US to get involved in order to perpetuate and all these false flag operations and the fake war on terror. This is the week of 9/11. Still so many questions. Trump promised he would release those files. RFK said he would release them. Trump, forget about the shitcoinery. If you want to do this in consultation with industry. Do a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset. Release the 9/11 files. Release the JFK files. Release the Epstein files. Tell Americans the truth so they know who their enemies are and who their enemies are not. That is draining the swamp. I don't think Kamala Harris will do it, but maybe there's a less than 1% chance that Trump does it. America, hold them accountable. They are not having your interest in mind at the moment with the current path. So why is this being escalated right now before Trump gets in power? I do not know. But at the same time, we are being told that Israel doesn't interfere in politics despite the power of AIPAC. And that it is, in fact, the Russian boogie monster that's interfering. And maybe he does. Would it surprise me? Of course not. Governments are governments. We need to fight against them. And we need to do, and our people need to resist against them with all we got. But we can't blame the wrong enemies. If we want peace, peace can only be built upon the truth. And the geopolitical environment right now is taking us all in the wrong direction. Putin already told long time ago that the rules were that the US and NATO, they will enter into a direct war if Ukraine uses Western-made missiles to strike inside Russia. So now they're testing him. Is this a game we really want to play? I certainly don't want to play it. I'm not sure if it's in the interest of our country to play it. We've all got our own debt problems, across the world. I'm trying to help people free themselves like I freed myself through Bitcoin. Do we really want to go down this path? Remember the rules of engagement that are being played right now. So Russia said, we will double anything that America funds and Europe funds and UK funds into Ukraine. They will never be able to beat us. NATO knows that America will always double it and is vastly superior. Okay? Then it also said, anything that you give to Ukraine, we will give to Iran to fight against Israel proxy war. US is in war in the Middle East. US is in war with Russia, and US is firing sanctions at China in order to make sure that those chips lead to China following the one China policy that America agreed to. These are all the agreements for peace. Why are we going against the agreements for peace? The status quo is what all of these wanted. And sanctions is being used that has created this environment. We've got to understand who the terrorists are. And our freedom is based upon terrorism. To that truth, we can't have peace because we will be fooled. Look back at my blog where I did the entire history of central banking from all the wars. The pattern is clear, it's obvious. And I just want to make sure as many people know it so that we can not do this. And I don't think the troops will want to do it. Do the troops really want to fight for Israel, given that they're committing a genocide and everything that we've seen, proven by the court? And guess what? You were told that you are supporting Israel defending itself in its war with Hamas. So why is Israel invading the West Bank that has no Hamas? Why is Israel destroying roads that has no Hamas? Why is Israel getting its illegal terrorists and giving them guns so that they can shoot Palestinians and move into their homes and expanding illegal settlements? Why is Israel destroying the water infrastructure in the West Bank? Why did Israel shoot an American protester in the face, and Biden didn't say a word about it? Why is that happening? Could it be? And why were so many lies around October the 7th? Could it be why there were so many lies around 9/11? That was the anniversary, 23-year anniversary this week. 3,000 Americans killed. Millions died as a result of false narratives. Why were we lied about weapons of mass destruction? Why do we have to have WikiLeaks funded by Bitcoin in a decentralized way in order to tell us the truth? Because we are being lied to. And these governments are not acting in our interest. This is not acting in our interest. China wants to negotiate peace. America doesn't want that. China wants to normalize between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China wants a two-state solution. China wants Palestinians to be free with self-determination, end the genocide. China wants to negotiate between Ukraine and Russia. China wants to keep the one state, one China policy and not have to reunify because of trade war, tariffs, trades, and all of those wars that are happening in order to put the national security of China at risk. China doesn't want all of those bases surrounding them in Philippines and Japan. The Middle East doesn't want all of these military bases. Iran just wants to have them removed. It's not kill America, it's kill the military in bases. It's allow for a nuclear deal, diplomacy, negotiation. Russia wants to protect its borders and follow the agreements. But NATO doesn't. The Bank of England doesn't. The Federal Reserve doesn't. The Bank for International Settlements doesn't. And that's creating de-dollarization because of all these sanctions. And we're being scammed into thinking that we're doing this because we're fighting for democracy. Wake up, people. I hope the geopolitical section of this helps you put it all together. It's all connected. Bitcoin's a part of that story because all of these countries can free themselves from the war machine's proof of weapons network, take back their control of their money by having a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset, and work on diplomacy. If there wasn't debt-based Ponzi schemes that take our governments and allow them to fund these wars. They're all aligning now through BRICS, and we've got to watch the conference, and hopefully currency competition is what brings us back to democracy. Currency competition is what allows us to trade with each other and get back to peaceful times. And currency competition allows countries to figure out Bitcoin and that they can free themselves as well from this as well. So that's the political situation. China will only reunify if it feels like the sanctions are going to threat its national security. Same with China. Same with Iran. Sanctions are driving de-dollarization. That's a good thing. But let's do it without World War III, please. And so what does the US do? Well, true or not, US came out and accused RT of interfering in politics and calling it state propaganda, and that they financed $10 million to get involved in intervening in American election. But we know why JFK was killed. Because he wanted to stop the foreign agent, AIPAC, from bribing its politicians. He wanted to end the Fed and launch debt-free money backed by silver. He wanted to come after the nuclear programs that the central banks were funding. And we're told that it's Russia that's interfering in the politics, China that's interfering in the politics, and Iran that's interfering in the politics, but Israel isn't interfering in the politics. Despite the fact that the highest court in the world, The Hague, classified him a war criminal, said he has to be arrested if he lands in your country, just like what happened with Putin. And both left and right in Congress clap like seals and treat him better than any president. You can't figure this one out? He told you need to go to war with Iran. So this attack on, basically, look, it could happen. Am I deluded enough to think that Russia, China, and Iran are not as evil as some of the other governments, or they want to resist against it and they have a political agenda? Well, we should all figure out the truth. I found WikiLeaks to be a very reliable resource because it releases the actual government documents rather than just the propaganda. But I think this was basically, they were attacking, saying that influencers are being used in order to perpetuate government propaganda. Sounds like an attack on freedom of speech. What have we been doing on X? What have we been doing on Rumble? What have I been doing when YouTube will eventually just shut this channel down, despite I documented the whole history? Don't worry, we back it all up in the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. But hopefully Elon gave us freedom of speech long enough to figure all this out. I think it was a dig at Tucker Carlson for him interviewing Putin and a warning message to us. Also, what did Tucker Carlson do recently? Well, he interviewed a gentleman that dared to call into question what happened during World War I and World War II. And that created an absolute firestorm because we are finding out that there was a Zionist intervention. There was Zionist aggression of Churchill when he was broke. There was aggression there. There was, even after trying to draw America into the war, by Churchill giving the Zionist entity Palestine, there was aggression there. And it turns out that it's all connected to the history of central banking as well, and what the economies look like that had a debt-free financial system at the time. And that was one of their crimes. And then from those aggressions, crazy acts were committed. We even saw that there's documented evidence that the Zionists were negotiating with Hitler in order to send 60,000 Jewish immigrants into Palestine. What's that all about? We deserve to ask these questions. These are questions that we can all ask. This led to the Holocaust, a complete atrocity. And now this has led to the Holocaust that's happening in Gaza right now. If I have to watch one more child die, massacre, blow up, beheaded by terrorists, funded by our tax dollar, funded through the proof of weapons network, I don't know what this has changed me. having to watch this. There's no time to ignore this. Our leaders are taking us in this direction. Do we really want to do this? Is this what we really want? And Tucker Carlson starts interviewing people that give us an alternative narrative. And all of a sudden, influencers need to be arrested for spreading any type of false information. Suddenly, people are getting arrested all over the UK, all over Germany, all over Australia for spreading information, for trying to tell what they believe to be the truth. It's gone too far on X right now. If you're not engaging in freedom of speech right now, you are not engaging in the battle for freedom. You may have accidentally found yourself on the wrong side of all the values that you stand for. You may have found yourself justifying the unjustifiable because we've all been lied to, we've all been tricked, and all we need is the truth. Release the files, Trump. Tell the truth. America deserves it. We deserve it. Our enemies are not our enemies. And I don't think the Proof of Weapons Network really planned for that. But we're all learning that the history we were told is very, very different to reality. And we need to dig deeper. We need to do questions because we want our governments to be better. And that's what patriotism is for me. Not blind allegiance. That's what I think the Constitution in the US was. That's what the Magna Carta was, which, by the way, was about restructuring the debt-based system that was inflicted upon that in order to get the Battle of 1066, the Battle of Hastings. And UK was being destroyed through debt. And the Magna Carta was written to write off that debt and restructure it and create a new monetary system that wasn't based upon debt. But the central banks figured out how to get rid of that one in 1694. Anyway, I think I've done enough. Let me see what I got. Any more notes? I think you can see where we're going. Let me see if there's any other important announcements. There was an ultimate troll, so let's try and turn this into a little bit of comedy, but I'm sure you saw it. Russia and Putin did a massive troll after this announcement when it said, Putin came out and said, I support Kamala Harris over Donald Trump in the presidential election because she's been endorsed by Joe Biden. The ultimate, I think that's the ultimate trolling. Obviously, Putin wants Trump so that they can have diplomacy, negotiate peace, and try and take on NATO. But you're being told that that is treacherous. Who's telling you that? That negotiating peace and standing up against NATO, could it be the same forces that fund all your media? Could it be the political interference that you're claiming Putin is doing? Wake up, people. We've got a lot to learn. And instead, of course, United States came out and accused Russia, China, and Iran, the very same countries that the aggression is against, and the very same lobby financing that is funding the politicians that are making everyone believe that this is the truth. And what else did they sign off? Well, they signed off on another 250 million to send over to Ukraine. That's been approved. I think that's another 50 billion now. And I think in total to Israel, 350 billion in order to keep up the Greater Israel project through aggression. A couple of other notes just to come to the end. The humanitarian organization that are fighting the genocide, feeding people after starvation, trying to get aids to people. These are the organizations that were organized by both allegedly the EU and the US. Well, all of those people that are involved in that, they've all had their bank accounts shut down, and all the NGOs have been shut down because Operation Choke Point 3.0 is happening to anyone that wants to support and stand against these atrocities that are happening right now. So bank accounts are being used. We know that that's how they try to take down WikiLeaks, but aid may get through if we can use Bitcoin, of course. Now, that's no endorsement because any money that's sent there There are certain groups that you are not allowed to make sure that your money gets to. Otherwise, it could be very, very dangerous for you. And none of us should be supporting any of those groups. Our country tells us that. And that's no endorsement of anything like that. But understand that finance is weaponized against us. Israel got way, way, way more aggressive. They've lost the plot right now. They're killing America. They killed an American, as I said earlier. They're destroying places that have got nothing to do with what they said as the Israel-Hamas war. And even the Cuban foreign minister, what does he accuses the US of being the counterpart, basically complicit in the Israeli genocide of Palestinians. The UK had to officially suspend 30 export licenses to Israel. Saudi Arabia came out and said it's strengthening its relationships with Iran. It's playing both sides. It's still got the petrodollar. It may join BRICS. It's taking China's peace plan. But America doesn't want anyone to know any of that stuff because peace isn't what Israel wants. The Chinese president Xi Jinping this week he reiterated that China is seeking to end Russia's war with Ukraine through diplomacy and diplomacy only. Now, you take it as propaganda. Do I trust any of these people? No, I don't trust any of these people. But I follow the money, and the money tells me the truth. And sometimes the money tells you that it aligns with some of these things. And that's how I've always done things. China has said that it finally supports Latin American countries in opposing the external interference and the violations of sovereignty through the IMF, through the Federal Reserve, through the military-industrial complex. And it will start supporting them to not have regime change, as we're seeing right now in many countries. We're seeing it in Pakistan. We're seeing it in Bangladesh. Guess where the next military bases want to be built for these corridors? And guess who wants to take over Venezuela's resources and oil? Guess who wants those regime changes? Guess who wants to pretend that these protesters are genuine bottom-up movements? So China wants to legitimize, some of these concerns that are painted as conspiracy theories if you're in the West. And Ukraine has warned Iran of devastating consequences if it continues to transfer missiles to Russia. So now they're connecting the wars as well. Those are deeply connected now. Saudi Arabia officially responds, it reopens its embassy in Damascus. That ends a 12-year diplomatic break so that is more and more, movement towards Saudi Arabia, maybe being in the middle and playing both the dollar defense strategy, the petrodollar, and the BRICS dollar. And the BRICS, the Petro BRICS, let's call it. And United States announced that it's sending another $707 million Ukraine. That was the week before for its war in Russia. And then Saudi Arabia also made an announcement ahead of the BRICS conference that it's open to using the Petro-Yuan for oil trades as well. So it's looking at building three different strategies: a Petro-Yuan, a Petro BRICS, and a petrodollar. So it looks like Saudi Arabia and all of its oil is important. And it turns out that there are certain resources, and I'm not endorsing the Saudi Arabian economy, but we know that Saudi Arabia, through its oil, means that people don't need to pay tax. It created a welfare state. I prefer productivity, but there are better ways of designing a system to increase productivity. But learn from those lessons. The tax is actually a way of just paying interest on the central bank's debt-based Ponzi schemes that causes all the problems and no longer acts in the state's interest. It acts in its own interest and its shareholders. I think I'm going to end it there. I think that's enough. It's a crazy time. It's gone from light to dark in the time that we've been live. But always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. Sometimes your freedom is based upon somebody else being terrorized. And I hope we can figure that out, because fix money, fix the world. It's what I've always believed in. It's what I've dedicated 20 years of my life to. And I think we can do this, a peaceful transition with peace, love, and unity, but only based upon truth. Without truth, we can never get to solutions, because lies will always take us to more violence. So I look forward to seeing you on the other side. Join me at simondixon.com. You can get a load of resources to do that transition. Get a free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And I'm going to be creating my next video series where we release how to protect yourself through this transition as well. And it's getting pretty dark here. Next time I'll have to put the blinds down because you get to see the reflection. Peace.